Hey guys, Ken, and I know I said that yesterday I would review the two episodes of Base Motel that I missed, including the one that aired last night. What ended up happening is that I meant to review it, and I was in the middle of watching episode 6, and I just fell asleep. I don't know what happened. I was just tired. I fell asleep. So what I decided to do is, rather than review 3 episodes, because it's going to take way too much of my time, I know you guys don't really, it's kind of unnecessary to review 3 episodes when I've seen all 3 episodes already. Instead, I'll just do a combined review reviewing all 3 episodes, talking about everything and having these 3 episodes, and then where I think we're headed for the rest of this season, because I'm still watching the show, obviously. I just got very behind. I remember I meant to review episode 5, 2 weeks ago, and then I meant to review episodes 5 and 6 last week, just didn't get a chance to. I wanted to review it over the weekend, but of course, just there were too many things there were too many other things I had to review. But let's just get into all 3 of these episodes, because I really do want to talk with them. Now, the biggest thing I think that happened in all 3, well, there are everything that happened in all 3 of these episodes are very monumental, because this is a very monumental season. There hasn't been anything that's happened this season that hasn't been big. Everything this season has been really big, but let's focus on Norman and Dr. Edwards, because this part of the show I've absolutely loved. I mean, here's the thing. Episode 4, of course, we were introduced to, actually, episode 3, we were introduced to Dr. Edwards, and Norman was convinced he didn't need help, that he was perfectly fine, that he doesn't need anyone, and we saw in episode 4 that he genuinely realized that he needs this help, and that he really does want someone to help him, and we actually see in episode 5 him actually being a good patient. He's actually taking responsibility for his actions. He's talking about his blackouts, and really just this is sincere. This is a sincere thing. This isn't Norman faking it. He actually is being sincere. He knows he needs help, and he does drop that his mother and him have a very typical, relationship. In his mind, he thinks they do, which of course they don't, as we know. And, he says, I think, then he says, I think not. And obviously, Edwards can tell there's definitely something up. And, he's very suspicious of that wording of him saying, I think not. So Norman explains how the reason for their closeness is because of his dad's death, so they had to be close because they only had each other. And Edward soon realized that Norman's only problem is his mother, and basically that's the main problem, is his connection to his mother, obviously. So this is really when things start to get really crazy, because we see Norman ask if he can make a phone call to Emma, which Edwards does allow, but of course, it's not really Emma, it's actually Norma that he tries to call, and at this point, Norma doesn't really want anything to do with him. We'll get into Norma's side of this in a little bit. But, basically, he generally tells her that he is working hard to get better. It's a very emotional scene, because you know that there really is no getting better for Norman. That's the thing that's most tragic about this season and of these episodes, that while Norman wants to get better, you know there is no getting better, because of course we know what ends up happening in Psycho. So he receives a call from the police about Norman's accusations and says that they're not grounded in reality, and that's just as well, because Edwards tells Norman that he denied the claim anyway. So it just doesn't sound true that this could actually happen. He doesn't think that Norman could have this split personality that he does, which of course we know he does, but at this point, Edwards just doesn't really believe him. So, not that he doesn't believe him, but he just doesn't feel that it's that's possible that someone could actually have something like that. So Norm, we see then, is alone. We see after what happens here is, this is when we get the big scene in episode 5. Basically, we see Norman is talking to Julian on this, bench outside, and he sees Norma, and the big question is, was Norma actually there? I mean, I'm pretty sure you could tell that Norma wasn't actually there, because this is the Norma that's in his head, and I love that we finally got to see this, because this wasn't just us seeing Norman act as Norma. He literally was Norma in this scene, and of course we saw it in episode 4, but this was how Norman sees things, not us seeing Norman as Norma. Norman sees it as him talking to Norma, who isn't really there. And we've seen this before in, of course, the season 3 finale, things like that. But I thought this was a really interesting scene, because we see Norma ask how therapy is going, ask what he's being instructed to talk about. And when Norma mentions his dad, Norma's firm is telling him he doesn't have to talk about things that made him upset or that hurt him. So in his mind, this Norma is kind of like a comforting spirit, the one that's basically telling him feeling, which we know the real Norma wouldn't actually do. This isn't something that the real Norma would tell Norman to do. This is simply just someone in his mind, and this is the Norma, the personality that he's created, which, as we can tell, is really not the real Norma personality. This is just, like I said, the personality that Norman has created, which I thought was very interesting that we saw that. And I definitely really did like seeing that. So Norman pretty much, again, is having a really decent section. He's even being helpful in group. He's in a good mood, mainly because Norma came in. This really gives Norman that motivation that he's fine that he's fine. And basically, Edwards gently asks if it's possible that Norman imagined this encounter with his mother, but Norman is firm in his belief that this was real. He feels that this was a real meeting, but Edwards can tell that it just doesn't sound real. Edwards tells him that he knows Norman called his mom when he was meant to call Emma. He also tells him to get a log of visitors every day, and Norma wasn't on there, and that really upsets Norman even more, as he believes. And Edwards is checking up on him and that he's crazy. He freaks out, he tries to leave, but Edwards manages to talk him down enough to finish his session in peace, and Edwards asks what Norman thinks of, and Norman says that, he doesn't see Norman in this scene. He sees Norma in this scene. Norma comes face to face with Edwards here. Edwards finally gets to see what Norman's really going through, and right away he can tell that it is Norma, that this is not Norman talking. This is Norma who's saying that he thinks, that she thinks he's a weak boy who's easy to take advantage of, and Edwards wants to know what's wrong with Norman, and he should ask the person that knows him best, and he says that she's the best person to ask, and I like that Edwards at least got to see his issues. This wasn't something where he doesn't get to see it, only we see it, and no one else sees it. This was something where he does get to see that Norman does have problems, that this is something that Norman can't really control at this point. I really did like seeing that. I thought that really added to the tension and drama that was going on with Norman, and it really, I think, made Edwards realize he really does need to help him more than he thinks he does. So I definitely did like seeing that, and even though, Norman didn't physically come through to Edwards, Edwards was able to get through to Norman this way by knowing that Norman has this split personality, so that was very interesting. So this really changed a lot between Norman and Edwards, because now Edwards knows he has a split personality. He wants to try to make this split personality appear. He wants that to happen again, knowing that he has this. He feels like if he tries to, get through this personality and maybe tries to do something about it, the best thing to do might be to actually physically talk to, Norman as Norma. And that's exactly what he tries to do, because he tries to get Norma to confess what's going on and why is this happening. And we even see that right in episode 6, which without a doubt is my favorite episode of this season, Norman's having his own dream. He's reliving his own trauma, being trapped in the box again. He's in another therapy session, and Edwards is asking if he knows what happens when he blacks out. And, because, of course he doesn't, and we know that Norman doesn't really know who he is when he blacks out. He can't really control it, and he tells Norman the person he spoke to at the end of last week's session wasn't him, but a version of his mother, and Norman wants to know what Norma said, and Edwards can tell that Norman has no recollection of this whatsoever. That's why Norman, in his mind, thinks that everything's fine, because he blacks out, he's not himself, and he can't control it either, and he doesn't remember any of it. So, Edward wants to know if Norma wants to say no, but he admits that he was, and Edward tries to get him to talk about his early life, which they haven't talked about as much, but Norman can't seem to remember nearly as much as Norma does, mainly because, we are to assume that this personality's been there for a while, and just that his dad was gone a lot, he spent a lot of time with his mother, and his life was pretty normal, which of course wasn't, as we know. This was not, this was not actually normal, as we know, and basically, I thought it was a very interesting scene. I thought that was definitely very well done the way they did that. Dylan actually goes to visit Norman in this episode, mainly to ask about Emma, pretty much is why he's there, which we'll talk about Dylan and Emma a little bit, but he can tell that Norman is a little bit better. He's actually calmer, and he actually seems to think that Norman is better, just the facade that Norman's putting up. You can tell this isn't true. You can tell that Norman is trying to put this up and basically make everyone think he's better, when really, in reality, he's not better, but Dylan pretty much thinks he is, even tells Norma that he seems better, and I think it was very interesting the way we saw that, and definitely, we'll get more into Dylan and Emma a little bit later, but because eventually everything does come back together, which I did definitely like seeing. But then as far as Norman goes, Edwards basically gets Norman to come out and basically relive the entire situation with what happened with her father, what happened with Caleb. Everything really does come out in this scene. I absolutely loved it. One of the hardest scenes to watch. I mean, really incredible stuff overall. Norma's there, watches as Norman slips into a trance, telling Edwards that he needs to protect her son, that she doesn't want to remember him. She doesn't want him to remember these things, even though, obviously they happen. She doesn't want to remember any of these things, which is very interesting. So, basically, that's what happens with Norma, is that now Edwards knows that this person is inside of Norman, and he can't really do anything about it, that it just randomly switches off, and he can't really control it. So now let's get to Norma's side of things, because we need to talk about Norma to eventually get to episode 7, because that's when things start to connect, and basically episode 7, life is actually good for Romero and Norma. As we know, they've kind of settled down. They actually are starting to feel like a real couple. But Norma can tell that there's something that's going on with Romero. The whole thing with Bob Paris, basically, he's not telling her why their house was broken into, but she kind of just pushes that aside for right now, at least, and it kind of seems like that's over because episode 7, Rebecca actually leaves, and this was the one part that wasn't exactly working for me this season. I definitely will say that the one thing that hasn't worked as well is the Bob Paris story. Not that it hasn't worked, it's just, it kind of felt secondary, and they kind of just get away from it after this episode. They kind of pretend it never happened, and basically, they don't talk about it for the next 2 episodes, which is interesting. Rebecca's in the picture, but it just doesn't really seem like we're really going to focus on this anymore, which is interesting, definitely. I think we'll get to, I think it's an intentional choice, and we'll get to why. Basically, at this point, Norma wants nothing to do with Norman. She feels that Norman is destructive, that, she doesn't need him, and she ends up running into Chick, who, of course, as we know, worked with Caleb, and Chick doesn't reveal at first that he knows Caleb. At first, he just reveals that he is this guy that, basically, basically what ends up happening is that we see that he's just from the hardware store and can help with the stained glass window, which is what she thinks that he is, that he's just there to fix the window. And Norman and Chick actually get very close, and basically, eventually, Norma does come to the realization that Chick does work for Caleb, and Chick basically gives Norman this proposition to actually, basically says to Norman, look, if you want me to kill Caleb, I will do it, because he wants Caleb killed for reasons. He knows that Norma wants him killed as well, and Norma really has to go through this revelation, and does she really want Caleb killed? Now, one of the best things they've ever done with Norma is this, realization that her brother did rape her. I mean, it added so much to her character in season 1. We've cared for her ever since. It just adds to the tragedy surrounding her life, and I really think this did add a lot. By having this in here, I really thought it added a lot, and I really think they did a great job with, those scenes. I mean, Vera Farmiga just kills it in those emotional scenes, and the scene basically with Chick and Norma, like I said, throughout the next episode, episode 6, she basically has to deal with this revelation. Does she want to change things between her and, does she want Chick to actually kill Caleb? I mean, she even calls Caleb at one point just to check up on, how he's doing and things like that. He even asks how Dylan is, and I thought it was interesting we saw that. And I do like that Caleb genuinely cares about Dylan, basically says that he just couldn't be around him. He was worried that, Chick would come after him, things like that, and just wanted Dylan to get out of there. And Dylan seems like he has moved on, because episode 6, that's when things start to collide with Dylan and Norma. Basically, episode 5, let's just get to it real quick. Dylan has decided that he does want to go to Seattle with Emma and her father. It's the best thing to do for them to go to Seattle, even though her father doesn't nearly think it's the best thing for them to do, for them to be together. He just doesn't know if they want to be together, basically, if he wants them to be together, and if it's the best thing for Emma. Emma's convinced that, Dylan should go to Seattle with her, and basically, he goes to get Norma's permission, and Norma isn't as warm about it as you'd imagine she'd be, mainly because of all the stuff that she's hiding. It has really nothing to do with, I think, Norma. It's more, with Dylan, I think it's more just Norma's inner rage about what happened with Caleb and everything. I think that's really what it's about, because her scenes with Chick, I really did love seeing. I think that this really was, there's a lot of a, catharsis in her scenes with Chick, because Norma really gets to admit all those things to Chick. She finally has someone to talk to about Caleb. Since Norman's not there, she hasn't really been able to talk about it, and Chick really gives her that opportunity to finally talk about it, and I definitely did like seeing. And we really do see, though, that Chick really just wants to do justice. That's really what he wants him to do. He claims that she can't accept her past and wants to know where Caleb is. He just wants him to do justice, and he's not a nice person. That's really what it is. He wants to get justice for Caleb for what he did to him, but he's not a nice person. We know that the Chick is a very shady person. I think Norma knows that as well. So basically, Dylan comes home. He tells Norma about Emma, everything that's going to happen there, and that they're going to get together. By the way, I really did like episode 5, that whole scene where Emma seemed like she didn't want to have sex because of the scars on her. I thought that was a really nice scene. I definitely thought that we did some really good stuff between Dylan and Emma this season. Some of my favorite stuff this season has been between those two, mainly because it's just been some of the more smaller scenes, and we need scenes like that, especially in a highly intense show like this. We do need scenes like that, and I thought they really did a great job of having those scenes to just add some nice little, what's the word I'm looking for? It just adds, I think, some good emotion and some good lighthearted stuff into the show. I definitely did like that. Especially because the show really doesn't have a lot of nice scenes anymore because it's so dark. So basically, we see this really nice, mature relationship talk between Dylan and Norma, and it's a really nice scene. We see basically they still haven't told Norman about Norma's marriage, obviously, and Norma's reason because they're very close, and he's very fragile, of course, as we know. And anything that Norman realizes that him and Norma aren't together, I mean, it's just gonna break him. And Dylan even says that making people fragile doesn't always end well. It's just not the best thing to do. And the conversation quickly veers into awkward when he tells Norma that he's planning to move to Seattle with Emma and her dad. And very soon, he promises he won't disappear, but it can be easy for Norma to listen to this and not feel like her son is choosing a whole new family, which in many ways he is. I mean, the reason Dylan's doing this is to get away from all this. He doesn't want to be in this drama anymore. Even though he wants Norman to be okay, and he does care about Norman and Norma, really, the idea is that he wants to get away from all this. I mean, it's just crazy for him. He doesn't think it's the best thing to do. He doesn't really feel this is, where he needs to be anymore. He needs to be with Emma and her father. That's really where he wants to be. And I did like seeing that. I like seeing that Dylan does want to be with them. That's where he should be, and I definitely did like seeing that. And I like that Dylan did get to make that choice, and Norman didn't try to fight him for it. But Norma does try to ask him about Caleb, which obviously Dylan's very suspicious about, because the last time he heard about Caleb, I mean, Caleb's been away, and he doesn't really understand why, but Dylan does tell Norma to leave him alone, but he gives her a breadcrumb of the motel name that he used to work at, and, like I said, she does call him up, and we have that whole scene and everything where he's talking to her, Caleb even calls Dylan and asks him how he's doing, which I thought was a really nice scene. I definitely did like seeing that. But then we get this scene with Norma and Chick, where basically she tells Caleb that, Chick, that she can't get Caleb killed, and she can't kill him, so she's screwed. And she doesn't know what to do because of the fact that she's not going to kill Caleb because he's a brother, and he understands that she was trying to do a good thing for Dylan, that Dylan needs someone like Caleb. But she can't kill Chick either because she doesn't really have any reason to kill Chick. So she really doesn't know what to do at this point, and she's very upset with what's going on here. And basically we see Dylan's coming to collect his stuff, basically to go back with Emma and her father to Seattle, and he finds a stuffed rabbit and letter from Emma's mother, which was clearly never received. And Emma does find out in episode 7 that Dylan does in fact know, met her mother without telling her, and this is something that she's not very happy about, but basically Dylan tells her there's really nothing they could do about it. We'll get into that in episode 7, but basically eventually, we see that he pulls up her info, noticing she checked in but never checked out, and then takes down her address. And then when Romero returns home later, Norma's in a much better place, and we get this incredible scene from Vera Farmiga. Like I said, Vera Farmiga just kills it in these kind of scenes, and this was the kind of scene that I think she just does amazing in, because we see Romero tells her that Chick's replacing the window. To Chick, that's just who Romero is, that he's just a guy that's just there to replace windows, and basically we see Norma, everything finally comes out. Everything finally comes out. Chick does leave without incident, with cause Romero to wonder what the hell's actually going on. And finally, everything comes out. Norma admits her affair, her brother, how Chick knew Caleb and Dylan threatened to expose their secrets through the town. And Romero obviously didn't know any of this. He actually isn't upset about this. He holds Norma protectively. He knows there's something she's going through, and he really does want to be there for her. A really nice scene. I absolutely love the way that was done, and I thought it was a very powerful scene. I definitely really did love that. I love the way that they showed that. I thought they fleshed that out perfectly, and I really love everything we saw between Norma and Romero here. I mean, that whole scene was just incredible. Without a doubt, the best episode of the season was episode 6. I mean, that episode was just incredible, between the stuff we got with Norma and Edward, seeing who Norma really is, seeing the past that seeing that Norman's turning into Norma, and then that incredible scene with Norma and Romero. Just everything about it, I absolutely loved episode 6. I think it was the strongest episode of the season. Let's get into last night's episode, because there was a lot of stuff that happened in last night's episode, obviously, especially between Norman and Norma, because that's really where things are going to change. Right when it seems like things are okay for Norma, things aren't okay, because right away in episode 7, we see that Norman's saying that he's okay, that he actually that he doesn't really need to be there anymore. He thinks that it might be the best thing to do to just check out, and basically, we see Julie, and it gets crazy when Norma wakes up with Romero. Basically, we see at the same time Norma's waking up with Romero, and basically Norm wakes up with Edwards after realizing he's blacked out again, and Julian makes a self-portrait of basically they're making like paper mache, and Norman sees an article, and the article says that Norma and Romero are together, and this just breaks Norman. I mean, this is when Norman is like, I need to get home as soon as possible. He's gonna make sure that someone doesn't try to take Norma from him. I mean, it's creepy as hell, but we knew something like this was gonna happen just because that's how the story's supposed to be. Like I said, Norman doesn't want Norman to be with anyone else. That's just how this is. And if Norman dares be with anyone else more than Norman, Norman thinks that he's going to lose her, which in many ways, he is kind of losing her. But Norman is happy to see that Norman's okay, as we know. I mean, we saw that she cared about him, things like that, but in his mind, he is losing his mother, and that his mother doesn't care about him nearly as much as she used to, and she cares more about Romero than she does about him. So you can tell that Norman wants Romero gone from her life. He wants to do whatever he can to get away from, he wants to get her away from him, but basically, we see Romero finds Norma in the basement where she's looking at options for home improvement. He offers to help, but that only makes Norma feel guiltier because as it turns out, she's in trouble financially with the house and the motel with everything going on and no money coming in. She actually gave up on the house. So basically, he actually gives her Bob Paris' money that he's hid in the basement, and that's how we get away from the whole Bob Paris situation because he's given her this money. I can't think this is over. I don't think this is all over. Norma's eventually going to find out about Bob Paris. I know that's got to happen, but for right now, it seems like we're actually kind of taking a back seat from that because Rebecca, like I said, leaves in this episode. That whole stuff ends. Basically, Rebecca's moving, and it seems like I think we're kind of away from the Bob Paris stuff for a while, which is good because most episode does focus on Norma and Norman, and basically, since Norman already knows about Norma Romero, he feels that the best thing for him to do is to leave. But Edwards knows that that's not the best thing to do because Norman does have a condition, but there's really nothing that Edwards can do. As Edwards says, Norman is entitled to sign the release papers at any time, basically. He can sign himself out at any time. Unless Edwards tries to prove a court case that Norman is a danger to himself and others, in which case he would have to keep Norman in the asylum, try to keep him there, and that might be the best thing to do. But Norman's convinced that, Norman's not okay. Norman's trying to tell her. Norman is convinced he's okay. Norman knows he's not okay, but deep down. I definitely did like seeing that, and basically, Norman does challenge her on whether there's some sort of secret reason why he shouldn't come home, because it's, she really is basically implying that she doesn't want him home, and, he knows obviously why. He's trying to get that out of her, but of course, she's basically trying to hide it as best as she can. So, meanwhile, with Emma and Dylan, we see Dylan comes home in time to catch the fight. Emma learns that he met her and that mother in the hospital and didn't tell her. And like I said, it's a really nice moment between Emma and Dylan. Like I said, I thought it was a very nice scene that we saw that. And Emma was very worried. Naturally, Dylan actually gives her the letter he found and makes his mission to find her. And basically, it looks like they are going to try to find what happened to Audrey. Is Audrey dead? Is she not? I mean, we haven't known since the first episode. We knew that Audrey obviously was in... was that her name? Audrey? I'm trying to remember. Emma's mom's name. We knew that she was in Emma's life, but we don't know, did Norman actually kill her? I mean, we've known that Norman did kill... It looked like he killed Audrey in the first episode, but we don't actually know if he killed her or not. So we'll have to find out, I guess, as the weeks go on. It does look like Dylan's going to make it his personal mission to actually look for Emma's mother, which I think is going to be interesting. So basically, Dylan comes home looking for Norma, whom he finds in this mood, and they have this whole big scene here where basically Dylan immediately becomes suspicious because she never checked out, and he realizes that Audrey never checked out, and Norma gets very defensive, essentially wants Dylan to admit that she thinks that Norman hurt or killed Audrey, because he knows deep down that Norman did it, but Norman's trying to deny all of that, and really all of that, Norma being afraid of her son, and Norma basically not believing anything that Norman says anymore, all of that's done because she really does think that Norman is better. The way that Norman's able to manipulate her into thinking this, I mean, you can tell that she really does think he's better, and she really does want to deny that Norman did kill Audrey, which we know deep down that he did, as Norma, and I like what Dylan says, that he thinks that Norman has this condition where he's just not himself and he doesn't really know what to do. Same with Edwards. Edwards knows this as well, and I like that a lot of people know this, but Norma just isn't denying it because of the relationship she has with her son and the fact that she doesn't want to admit that her son really is this killer. So, I mean, she knows that he has a problem, but she doesn't want to admit that he's actually capable of killing. So basically, we get this great scene with Emma and with Edwards and Norman, where basically Edwards tells Norman straight out that he doesn't think that this is okay, that Norman is he's not normal, he's not someone that, he blacks out, and he's not the same person, he just doesn't feel it's the best thing to do, and he even tells Julian, and Julian's a little bit surprised, but Norman quickly puts him in his place, says, I'm not normal. I thought Norman was just going to straight up kill Julian. I thought that's what was going to happen, that Norman was going to kill Julian, he was going to basically, he was gonna kill Julian. Therefore, what's the word I'm looking for? What's the word? I can't think of the word I'm looking for. Therefore, not denying. Therefore denying all his chances of getting out of the hospital. That would have done that, but of course, because of that, Norman doesn't kill Julian, as we see. We see Norman's very smart. Norman realizes he can use what people see in his personality, his empathy, and his gentle nature, and manipulate them into giving him what he wants. And, Julian, he just scares. But then we get this great scene with Norman and Norma, where Norman basically manipulates Norma into seeing that he's okay, which deep down we know he's not. But Norman, like we said, is very persuasive, and he does a very good job at getting people to believe his facade, which he really isn't better. But to Norma, he really does make her think that, because Norma refuses to go behind his back, asks if he would be helped to speak to him, and Norma isn't happy to see Norma, though it's not their usual reunion. He's distant and cold, probably one of the hardest scenes we've ever seen between Norman and Normie. We know every scene between these two has been toxic this season, but we haven't had a lot of scenes between these two in a while, so seeing this really is very terrifying to see. It really does feel like Norma's coming face to face with, like, a maniac, just a psycho. It really does feel like Norman is a psycho in this scene. And we see Norman is too emotional over seeing Norman to notice until Norman reveals the paper that he's found showing Norma and Romero's relationship, and Norma immediately backpedals, assuring her son that she only married him for show, for him, and she says that everything she's done, and Norman says that everything he's done it for her, and Norma agrees that this whole exchange is immensely uncomfortable, especially when Norman starts interrogating Norma about if she's sleeping with him. I mean, incredible stuff overall. Freddie Highmore and Vera Farmiga just killed it in this scene, and he manipulates Norma into letting him come back. And this makes Norma think, well, not think, but basically he's made her now think that he needs to come back. And basically, I thought it was very interesting we saw that. And also, we do get a scene with Dylan and Emma where we see Emma actually express interest in no longer finding her mother. She doesn't want to find her, who she believes really did leave because she wanted them to feel sorry for her and bail out on her own issues, which I think is very interesting. But you can see that Dylan feels there's more behind it. And I don't think Dylan's search for Emma's mother is over. I think he is going to search for Audrey. Even though Emma told him specifically not to, I do think he's going to continue looking for her, definitely. I mean, I wouldn't think that Dylan would just not look for her. It would make sense for him to do that. So, Norman does in fact leave, the hospital, and then we get this devastating scene where Norma returns home. He finds Romero, and she basically has to admit to Romero that she's letting her son back, and he thinks that it's a terrible thing to do, and you can tell right away that Romero is going to be out of her life. Romero's not going to be a big part of this anymore. He knows it's going to happen, and he says that she wants to do this, that this is her kid, that he's shown that he should be checked out, and she even tells him how she had to tell Norman that they were only married for his sake because, of course, she couldn't be honest with him because she had to protect him. And she suddenly realizes that she's screwed up and that she really does have problems. And I love this scene. Romero does end up forgiving her, even vowing to be a decent father figure so they can get through this. But you can just tell that that's not going to happen. What Romero wants is never going to happen. I mean, he's not going to be that father figure to Norman that he needs, even though he wants to be. I mean, Norman is not okay. Norman, we know, has problems. He's not going to let Romero be this father figure, and it's really sad to see, but you can really see that Romero really does want this, but unfortunately, Norman just doesn't, as we know, and Norman is in this state where he doesn't really know what he wants, and basically, Norman does leave Pineview under the watchful eyes of Edwards. He exits into arms of his mother, and right away they're back at the motel. They're going to be living there again. Norman is back living with Norma, and that is how this episode ends. And holy shit, I mean, things are going to be crazy in these last 3 episodes. First of all, there is no way that Romero's out of their life. Romero clearly is going to be shut out, and I think what Romero wants, like I said, it's a good idea, but it's just never going to happen. He's never going to be able to be that father figure to Norman, because we already see in the promo for next week, Norman is telling him straight out, I want you to divorce her. He says straight out, I want you to divorce her, I want you to leave, and obviously Romero's not going to do that. Romero's not going to. It's going to be interesting to see if Romero actually falls for Norman's tricks, if he actually does fall under Norman's spell, if Norman is able to convince him to. I mean, definitely it's going to be very interesting, because I don't know if Romero's going to be as easy to persuade as, say, Norma or Edwards, who he developed a strong connection to. He doesn't have that bond with Romero. As we know, Romero's just someone that's watched Norm for years and really has wanted to help him, and he really feels he's the best thing for Norm right now. So we'll have to see what happens with that. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens there. But like I said, I really do think that Romero and Norma, one of them is not making it out of the season. One of them is definitely dying. I think it's probably going to be Romero. I don't think Norma's going to go this season. I think Romero's probably going to die this season. I definitely could see Norman doing that, especially if Romero doesn't want to leave. I definitely could see Norman killing Romero very soon, actually. Not just the finale. I could see him doing it in like episode 9. It'd be crazy, and it would really change the bond between Norma and Norman forever, but that bond has already changed. I mean, the only reason Norman's acting this way is because Norman's convinced her that he's better, which we know deep down he's not. I think she knows that as well, but she also knows that she's a little crazy. And even though she is, Romero still does want to be with her, and I definitely did like seeing that. Bob Paris, this is not over. I mean, this is definitely not over. I think eventually Norma is going to find out about Bob Paris and what's going on there. Why Romero's not telling her, I don't really know. We'll have to see what happens with that. This is not the end of Bob Paris, though. We're going to hear about him again, and this is not the last we've heard of him. I know for a fact that this is going to come back into play, and she's got to find out at some point that Romero killed Bob Paris. It's just, she's got to find out. It's got to be something that happens here. Dylan is definitely not done looking for Audrey. I know that Emma told him not to, and that Emma said, oh, I don't need you to do this, but I feel like Dylan is going to do this. He really cares about Emma. He wants her to have a good life, and I feel like the best thing for him to do is to actually look for a father. I feel like he does want to do that. We'll see what happens with that. It's going to be very interesting. But overall, guys, and also, I don't know if, obviously, Norman still left Pineview, but does that mean that he's done with Edwards? I mean, maybe he'll be mean with Edwards privately. I don't really know. But overall, guys, let me know what you guys saw these episodes. I absolutely loved all 3 of these episodes. I think this is, like I said, this is probably the best season of Bates Motel we've had, without a doubt. I cannot wait for the last 3 episodes of the season. They're going to be crazy. I'm sorry I got far behind. Definitely won't happen next week, since, of course, Bates Motel is the only show I have to review on Mondays now until Jane the Virgin's over. But let me know what you guys saw this episode. Love to hear your thoughts on it. We'll see you guys in my next video, which will be for, I think, tonight's episode of The Flash, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.